The present-day city of Fukui, Japan, may now be the most important, most populous city in its region. But there was a time not too long ago when its importance paled in comparison to its nearby cousin, the capital city of the samurai. Off just a wee bit into the distance, just over yonder hill, there's the Ichijo Valley, a place so quiet, so unbothered it could be mistaken for a retirement home for rice paddies. To the naked eye, it's just another scenic spot in Japan. Mountains on three sides, nature doing its thing, and tourists snapping photos of absolutely nothing. But beneath this tranquil facade lies a secret. This place used to matter, like really matter. Welcome to Ichijodani. In one of planet Earth's most populous countries, this wee bit of it is already worthy enough in that it's one of the few places in Japan where there are less people now than there was way back when. 500 years ago, this valley was filled with samurai drama, political intrigue, and enough cultural ambition to make Kyoto sweat. And then, just as quickly as it had risen, this medieval metropolis went from center of power to forgotten rice basin, faster than you can say Oda Nobunaga. It may not be much to look at now, and even harder to imagine, but nestled safely in this steep valley once lay a capital city that would change the history of Japan. I am Ancient Swan. Thank you as always for watching, and let's all just agree that was something closing in on an introduction. Back in the day, let's say from 1471 to 1573 AD, give or take a few betrayals, the Asakura Clan ran the show here. Now, under this powerful clan, the city of Ichijodani had the audacity to try and rival Kyoto. Yes, Kyoto, the imperial capital, the cultural mothership, the place where emperors had been lounging around for 800 years while poets debated the metaphysical properties of cherry blossoms. But despite all its power, Ichijodani had something that Kyoto didn't: samurai. For nearly 1,000 years, the samurai were the poster boys of discipline, honor, and slicing people in half with style. Known for their katanas, because apparently straight swords weren't dramatic enough, these warriors weren't just fighters, they were a full-blown cultural aesthetic. A group of men who some centuries before had started out as glorified security guards to rich folk with too much money and not enough stealth. Over time, these hired hands unionized into a full-blown warrior class, and like any good power structure, they eventually decided they didn't need their bosses anymore. And who was their boss? Well, technically, in the beginning, that would be the emperor. Japan's first legendary emperor, Jimmu, founded the first imperial Japanese dynasty in 660 BC. And for centuries, emperors expanded their rule by gloriously gobbling up provinces until by the 8th century AD, they had most of modern Japan under their belt. But the emperor's power was short-lived, because as the empire grew, so did the power of the samurai. But by the 12th century, the emperor was basically a ceremonial figurehead. Like a CEO who still gets invited to board meetings but isn't allowed to talk. The real power belonged to the shogun, a hereditary title given to Japan's top military leader. The first samurai shogun was appointed in 1192, and from that point on, the emperor was just the guy who signed the paperwork while the shogun ran the show. So yes, the samurai didn't just serve the empire, they became the empire, a class of warriors who started as mercenaries and ended up ruling the country. It's the ultimate rags to riches to regime change story, and all it took was a few centuries, a lot of bloodshed, and a PR campaign so effective it's still selling katana replicas today. Rolling into the 15th century, and Japan enters what we now call the Warring States period. In the decades leading up, the power of both the shogun and the samurai themselves had waned, and lack of power control saw Japan fracture back up into a bunch of smaller kingdoms, each with their own ruler known as the daimyo. Japan's central government in Kyoto did what all great bureaucracies eventually do: collapse spectacularly. This period, lasting more than 150 years, was ripe for violence and continuous ass-kickings. Despite their power, the samurai were effectively still just a bunch of hired mercenaries who would fight for anyone who paid enough, and so they often fought each other as each kingdom's daimyo bankrolled as much defense for his land as he could muster. War was endless. Violence was commonplace. Each kingdom and daimyo saw itself as the rightful ruler of a new unified Japan. Almost all of them would learn the hard way. In this chaos, some warrior families decided, why serve when you can seize? One such family was the Asakura. Originally glorified assistants in Echizen Province, they pulled the classic coup playbook: overthrow your boss, take his office, and pretend it had been yours all along. By 1471, they'd booted out their overlords and claimed the region for themselves, going on to rule it for the next 5 generations. Now, ruling a province during a civil war isn't just about having swords, it's also about having infrastructure. Enter the castle town, part fortress, part admin center, part medieval HR department. These towns popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, each one a testament to paranoia and power consolidation. Takakage Asakura, the dynasty's founding father and part-time real estate visionary, chose the Ichijo Valley to build his castle town. Why? Because it was remote, defensible, and probably had great feng shui. The valley was 2 miles long and just 260 feet wide at its narrowest point, basically a medieval hallway with mountains. Perfect for bottlenecking invaders and making sure no one could sneak in without a formal RSVP. Defensive gates sealed off both ends, and watchtowers perched on 1,400-foot peaks gave the Asakura a panoramic view of incoming threats, or at least a great spot to sip tea and judge the neighbors. It was a fortress, a capital, and a statement. We're here, we're armed, we're watching you, and we've already killed people to get these property rights. Now, during this period, and in almost all of these castle towns, it had become the norm for the ruling daimyo to build his castle slap-bang in the middle of it all. So the Asakura had the same choice. Build their castle in the middle of town like everyone else, or slap it on top of a mountain like they were auditioning for a feudal Bond villain. Naturally, they chose the mountain, because what's the point in being ruler if you can't hide yourself from your own city in a fortress so high up you spend your entire life with altitude sickness? Even today, the site is a logistical nightmare. Archaeologists need airborne LiDAR just to figure out where the buildings are. Because when you're defending yourself from constant war, hidden by dense vegetation is a feature, not a bug. The castle itself was a sprawling complex of guardhouses, embankments, moats, and more than 140 trenches. It had residences, temples, and all the trappings of a final refuge for the daimyo, not the city. Just the daimyo, because when the enemy comes knocking, leadership means retreating to your mountain spa and letting the peasants sort it out. Unfortunately for the Asakura, though, their distance high up above the rest of the city would one day be its Achilles heel. It's like installing a fire alarm in your neighbor's house and hoping it'll save yours. This brilliant oversight would later prove costly, which is historian speak for catastrophic. Now, like all warring states' warlords, the Asakura's real power came from the people they controlled, or at least the people who worked for them. In this case, that would be the samurai, the big guys with swords who did the paperwork. The Asakura daimyo had implemented a system where samurai weren't just warriors, they were also bureaucrats, because nothing says government efficiency like giving your most violent employees legal authority. After seizing power, the Asakura ordered around 12,000 of their finest samurai to relocate to Ichijodani. But this city quickly grew into something more than just a mere castle town for the daimyo to sit and feel safe. Because not too far away lay the city of Kyoto. But unfortunately for Kyoto, it was a bit too busy being obliterated by the Onin War to host tea parties. Because apparently no one in medieval Japan believed in conflict resolution that didn't involve burning down half the city. With Kyoto reduced to a smoldering pile of regrets, its citizens, the monks, artists, poets, intellectuals and craftspeople fled north like it was the last thing they'd ever do. Ichijodani was just a 3 or 4 day walk from the chaos, and so it soon became the warring states' version of a refugee safe haven from the hell that was constant war. What started as a wartime necessity morphed into a full-blown cultural boomtown. Refugees brought their cosmopolitan flair, and suddenly Ichijodani was hosting poetry readings between trench-digging sessions. During a time defined by chaos, Ichijodani somehow became a model of stability. What makes this lost city great for archaeologists is that, because it no longer exists, it's now just a hell of a lot easier to get stuck in with a shovel and dig stuff up. You see, most Japanese medieval cities are still very occupied, making archaeological digs a wee bit of a logistical nightmare, but not Ichijodani, because this place got destroyed so thoroughly that it's now an archaeologist's dream. No pesky modern buildings in the way, just layers of history waiting to be poked, prodded and catalogued. So far, they've unearthed over 1.7 million artifacts, which is either very impressive or it's a sign that medieval hoarding was a real problem. And as the excavation continues, it turns out Ichijodani wasn't just a cultural sponge, it was an industrial buffet. The city had metal casters, potters, bead makers, gunsmiths, textile dyers, lacquerers, brewers and woodworkers. Basically, if you could make it, drink it or hit someone with it, Ichijodani had a guy for that. And yes, there was even a resident doctor, because nothing says civilized society like having someone who can diagnose your trench foot while you sip artisanal tea. It's almost enough to make you forget the whole impending doom part of the warring states era. Can you imagine being the only doctor in a city full of samurai during a period of constant war? I bet that boy was kept busy. I hope he got paid right. Modern doctors might think they are ran off their feet, but they quite literally know jack shit when compared to being the only doctor during wartime surrounded by bleeding samurai. And yet, despite all of this, people kept on coming to Ichijodani. At the height of its cultural glow-up, Ichijodani welcomed its most prestigious guest, Yoshiaki Ashikaga, heir to the shogunate of Kyoto and walking embodiment of "I used to be important." His family had held the shogun title since 1336, which sounds impressive until you realize that by the Warring States period, their influence had all the staying power of a paper umbrella in a typhoon. In 1565, Yoshiaki's brother Yoshiteru was assassinated, since as part of a tradition going back millennia, nothing says career change like a sword to the chest. With Kyoto in chaos and his family's power in freefall, Yoshiaki had to flee. And where does a displaced heir go when he's trying not to get kidnapped or murdered? They went to Ichijodani. When you need to be defended, there literally was no better place. For 9 months, Yoshiaki lived in a temple compound just outside the city's southern gate, probably wondering how his life had gone from imperial palaces to rural guest housing. Meanwhile, Yoshikage Asakura, now daimyo of the region, played constant host to his still very important guest. The highlight of all of this would be Yoshiaki's genpuku, his coming-of-age ceremony. Think bar mitzvah, but with more swords. This wasn't just a party, it was a flex. 200 guests, ceremonial toasts, armor gift bags, and war horses handed out like party favors. Hosting the genpuku was the Asakura Clan's way of showing how important they had become. But unfortunately for them, it wouldn't be for long. Why? Because politics, that's why. And because trusting displaced royalty is like giving your house keys to my sister and expecting the furniture to still be where you left it when you get back. After the genpuku, a mysterious rift developed between Yoshiaki and his Asakura hosts. Scholars still debate the cause, but let's be honest, it probably involved ego, ambition, and someone not getting the answer they wanted. Soon afterwards, Yoshiaki decided to return to Kyoto and reclaim his title as rightful shogun of the region. He asked the Asakura clan to join him. However, in a rare moment of strategic clarity, they said nah. So Yoshiaki turned instead to Oda Nobunaga, a ruthless warlord from nearby Owari province who had all the charm of a buzzsaw and none of the restraint. This was a man who his contemporaries referred to as the Demon King, so it's fair to say he probably wouldn't have voted Democrat. Nobunaga quickly helped restore Yoshiaki as shogun of Kyoto, but only so that he could turn this new shogun into a puppet. Because Nobunaga didn't just want to support power, he wanted to be the power, and his influence was now undeniable. Time was about to close in for Ichijodani. This is the part where the curtain drops, because if the Asakura had been living the dream, they were about to wake up in flames. As Nobunaga's ambitions ballooned into full-blown conquest cosplay, daimyo across Japan, including the Asakura, decided it was time to form an alliance. A noble gesture, sure, but also the strategic equivalent of bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. To put it very bluntly, they chose a side, says historian Morgan Petelka, and they chose wrong. And when you choose wrong against a man who thinks diplomacy is best served with fire, you don't get a do-over, you get a funeral. After 3 years of clashes, Nobunaga delivered the knockout punch at the Battle of Tonezaka in 1573, just 30 miles from Ichijodani. The Asakura's army scattered like rice in a windstorm, and the once confident daimyo fled back to his capital. But he didn't stick around for long, because when your defense plan is hope they don't notice, you don't linger around. Nobunaga, ever the overachiever, chased the daimyo's trail back to Ichijodani, unaware that his target had already ghosted the city. What he found instead was a nearly undefended urban center, ripe for destruction. On August 18th of the year 1573, Oda Nobunaga's forces set the city ablaze with all the subtlety of a fart in a spacesuit. The fire didn't just consume buildings, it devoured the city's soul. Archaeologists later found burned soil layered over every single remaining feature of the city. Foundation stones scorched red and paving stones that looked like they'd been through hell. As for the people trapped inside, the ones who hadn't had the foresight to flee, well, they panicked, and then they perished. According to written sources of the time, the fire raged for 3 whole days, and when it finally died down, Ichijodani was gone. No homes, no shops, no samurai, just that one doctor relieved that he could finally retire. Because what people are there to heal when there are no more people? I'm joking, by the way. The doctor also died. Although the final daimyo, Yoshikage Asakura, may have safely fled before the city's destruction, his dishonor was irreparable. Shattered and betrayed, he performed seppuku, a ritual unaliving event, since in feudal Japan quitting your job came with disembowelment and not a LinkedIn update. In samurai terms, this is him basically saying, I'd rather gut myself than deal with Nobunaga's victory parade, thus bringing an end to the Asakura Clan's long, occasionally glorious and ultimately doomed legacy. But how about the history of Japan? Well, as Oda Nobunaga had already proven himself unwilling to share, he soon went on to depose the puppet ruler and forced Yoshiaki into exile. Along with his 2 successors, Hideyoshi Toyotomi and Ieyasu Tokugawa. I know I'll be butchering these names, but quite honestly, at this point I'm beyond caring. So anyway, Toyotomi and Tokugawa went on to end this period of constant war by beating the crap out of anyone left alive who opposed them and reunified Japan in the process. In 1603, Tokugawa re-established the shogunate, and his descendants held on to it for 265 years, until the late 19th century when the modern Japanese government finally said, enough cosplay, let's retire the samurai. And just like that, the age of the samurai ended, not with honor, but with bureaucracy. And therein ends the story of Ichijodani, the lost city of the samurai. Nobunaga didn't just beat them, he razed the city and removed all record it had ever existed. And so, Ichijodani vanished, not metaphorically, but literally. Buried under rice fields for 400 years, like history itself said, let's pretend that never happened. Archaeologists only stumbled upon it in the 1960s, probably while wondering why their rice kept hitting pottery shards. They'd heard whispers in old letters and court documents, and a few Buddhist statues poked out like, hey, remember us? But no one expected the full samurai suburbia buried beneath the valley floor. What they found was a time capsule so pristine it made Pompeii look like a garage sale. After 6 decades and over 100 excavation campaigns, archaeologists have finally pieced together what life was like in a medieval samurai city. It was organized, it was elegant, and it was doomed. Because when 2 samurai armies meet on the battlefield, only one walks away, the other gets turned into a museum exhibit and then a YouTube video by a guy called Ancient Swan, who looks like me because that's what he looks like. As in every lesson, ladies and gents, it's time to wrap up. But before that, we need to cover what we've learned. You can't have a lesson without a summing up. So troops, what have we learned? Well, I've learned to never build my utopia next to a crazy warlord with dreams of empire. If your neighbor's hobbies include arson and unifying Japan through bloodshed, then maybe build your house somewhere else, preferably on sand for what it's worth. I've also learned that art is all well and good, but it's also important that you learn how to throw a punch. Sure, Ichijodani had art, Ichijodani had culture, but history doesn't care how many calligraphy scrolls you hang on your walls if you back the wrong warlord. I've learned today that if your strategy is to wait and see, then you'll mostly see flames. The Asakura Clan's tactical brilliance of let's put our castle way up there didn't help much when the way down below was burning to the ground and too far away to defend. The lack of troops remaining might have had somewhat of an effect too. As always, history remembers the victors and very quickly forgets the losers. If it weren't for a few scattered mentions in historical texts, there is a good chance Ichijodani would have been forgotten completely and perhaps never found. So yeah, don't do that. Don't lose. Now, at this point, I'd like to quickly remind you all that if you have in any way enjoyed this wee video, then please do leave a like and a subscribe. The AI that runs YouTube nowadays relies on this to know whether or not I'm a load of rubbish, and I think it's about time we all learn to trust the AI, because we have no other choice. And if you haven't enjoyed this video, but you have instead just walked away from your computer and left the video running, then thank you for that too, because the AI algorithm knows not about your current position, and it only thinks you're still watching, which is all I really care about. So thank you very much. And a quick thank you also to Planet Earth's greatest Patreons, those being DD, George H, Malichi I, Stephen, Anthony T, and David R. Without you, I'd probably be sitting in a corner somewhere looking at Excel spreadsheets and crying. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to come back next time. It'll be fun, I promise. I'd also like to take this moment to give a quick shout out to a special university Lord God named Jason Urbanus, a member of the alumni at Brown University, Rhode Island, USA. I'm giving this special shout out quite simply because in all these Lost City videos I've made, now well over 100 of them, never in all my time have I had to rely on one single source for information. There is almost no decent, thorough record or writings about Ichijodani on the web, and that's saying something. Even its Wikipedia page is barely 4 paragraphs and goes into nowhere near as much depth as I'd like. Most videos I make will draw from at least a dozen different sources, but for this video there was really only one, and those were the articles written by Jason. My apologies also for keeping with the title, Lost City of the Samurai. There really was no better, no more succinct name I could think of than this one. So Mr. Urbanus, if you ever do come across this video, cheers buddy, it's much appreciated. Right then, that's it folks, I'm off. Peace, love, and Ichijodani.
Goodbye!